Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Youth Bombs podcast. I am Coleman.
I'm Craig.
And I'm Olivia.
Olivia, what are we going to talk about today?
So there's been a lot of talk about Sharia law trying to get passed in particularly London and England and across all of Western Europe. They're really struggling with this, but it's also happening in Minnesota. But a part of Sharia law has two components to it that in practice and in government has become kind of dangerous for women and young girls, and it's starting to become kind of a threat for young American women and young American girls. So Sharia law, just like any other major organized religion, is just a set of like rules that a Muslim should follow to be more holy. We see this in Catholicism. You have the Catechism.
Yeah.
Not trying to say they're the same thing, but, an equal type of thing. However, in practice, at a government level, especially in Islamic regimes, Sharia law has made way for child brides. And we're starting to see in Afghanistan, as the Taliban just passed a new law in accordance with this whole Sharia law mindset, that now women can't look at other men in the eye, and they can't sing in public, they can't read out loud in public, and their education is limited to, I think, about 6th grade. This has been going on since about the 70s, ever since the Islamic Revolution. Persian and Afghani women in pre-Islamic Revolution, they walked around, wearing very Western clothing, were able to wear their hair freely, and like out in the open, were able to attend universities. Yeah. But ever since then, it's been a gradual like clamp down on their rights and on their human rights. And it's not really a bipartisan issue. It's really a nonpartisan issue because we're talking about, child marriage, and we're talking about just, simple like civic rights for women. And we're seeing it in Afghanistan. It just passed, and Afghani women are really, oppressed right now, and they're under fire right now. Although we don't really hear much about it in the news, but what we are hearing is a bunch of the protests because some Islamic people want to bring in Sharia law into our own civil law and our own American civics and Western civics. And again, like Sharia law is a whole bunch of things that a Muslim should do in accordance to be more holy. But as I said, in practice, it makes way for child marriage, which has been an ongoing issue in the Middle East, and arranged marriage. Even in America, don't be fooled, Muslim people are arranged, do have arranged marriages in the United States, which is completely illegal. But it's also, it's also making way for, sorry, edit this part out because I kind of stumbled over my words.
You're good.
So when we see Sharia law, in practice, obviously, it's limiting basic, fundamental human rights that we as Westerners and we as Americans really value. Mm-hmm. So, what do you guys think? Do you think that it's justified that people are talking out and coming out against this, or do you think it's a bigotry? Because sometimes when you argue these things and you don't come from that culture or don't come from that religion, you might not be versed in how it's actually played out within that culture. However, we're seeing that even Afghani women don't like this. Ever since Malala came out, I think she's really brought that to the front.
Wait, who's
stage.
Malala?
She is a young Afghani woman who got shot by the Taliban for going to school, but she survived, and then now she's like a human rights activist, and she got brought over to Switzerland and I think the United States. I think she lives in the United States now, or she's Pakistani.
Oh, wow.
But, the worry is that this radical thought, in the sense that it's so different from Western thought, is now trying to get passed within our laws. But, like I said, like when you protest against it, sometimes it can be hard.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think?
I have my thoughts. Craig, do you want to have the first take?
Yeah, so this clearly shows that Islam is radical in nature. It's not just as the liberals say, for instance, oh, well, only 1% support ISIS, say, which out of 1 billion people is a lot. That's a high number, okay? We're talking a big number of people. But you have hundreds of millions of people who support men having dominance over their wives, over wanting Sharia law enforced, believing that men should be able to beat their wives. It's radical in nature. It's not moderate Islam. This has to play into our immigration policy in some manner because we don't want to turn into Afghanistan. We don't want to turn into what the Taliban are doing. How do you feel, Coleman?
All right. So, I think this was an issue, like, I think going way back in, like, the 2010s even. And I think one of the most prominent voices at the time who was bringing this issue up was Lauren Southern, for instance. So she was one of the big voices who was speaking about this issue of how the incompatibility of Western civics and Islamic civics. And they don't, they conflict, and very much so on the issue of how women can conduct themselves in everyday society. And you're going to end up with, issues, as you're now seeing, I believe, is Britain now is, like, having all these, like, riots now with, like, between the natives and then the immigrant, Islamic immigrants. And then, of course, she was, banned from various countries and then called hateful, etc., conspiracy theorist, what have you. But then, unfortunately, a lot of what she brought up to the surface way back is now coming to the forefront yet again, several years later. And now, as far as, again, to Olivia, to your point as to, like, why this is difficult to talk about, because you're dealing with, like, religion. You're dealing with whether or not it's people's choice, I don't know, to live this way or not or whatever. But I think to your point, it's a matter of the compatibility of cultures. And then can, for instance, the Western civic be compatible with Islam? Many argue no, but mostly because you see how women are treated in Islamic culture, especially now with the new Taliban laws of, again, like, not just, like, the whole covering, but, like, no singing in public, no reading out loud in public, no, like, the restrictions on eye contact. A lot of this is just, frankly, if I told you, for instance, that this was not within a religious context, this would seem questionable at best. But then I think now to play the devil's advocate a little bit, I mean, I'll change the words, to argue on the other side. For instance, have had within the Safe Club at UF, which is a club called Spirituality Accessible for Everyone, they had people of various religions come and, like, speak. We had one woman who was Muslim, come in and speak and talk about her faith. And then one of the arguments for why she, like, actually liked, for instance, the whole idea of, like, covering yourself entirely is because she liked the idea of, oh, I like it that other people are basically forced to judge me off of my personality and, like, zero on looks.
Yeah, and that is something to talk about because veiling, like, as Christians, when you attend Catholic Mass, some women do wear a veil over their hair.
Yeah.
I mean, nuns obviously are always wearing a veil over their hair. Jewish women, sometimes very Orthodox Jewish women, when they're married, they wear, like, a veil over their hair, wear a wig over their hair.
And that's talked about in Corinthians, by the way, in the Bible.
Yeah, it is mentioned in Corinthians. However, there's a difference, and I think we're seeing it played out in actuality. Christians, you don't have to, and you're not going to be forced to.
Yeah, that's the
And you don't have all
key.
these other caveats, as in being arranged into a marriage with a man who's 50 years old and you're only 13 years old. You don't have to not look at a man or an unrelated woman
Yes.
in public and, avert your eyes away without the fear of, being beaten or chastised by your husband. So, yes, veiling is a very common thing in a lot of religions, especially for deeply traditional, deeply religious people. However, when we see it in actuality, I think it's very evident how it's so different, and how in Islam it's being forced upon women within their own culture, whether they know it or not. And women who are actually from these countries, who I've seen interviews with, even from like CNN. CNN a few years ago did some pretty good exposés on like child brides in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And these women they're not happy. I mean, they're being forced to marry older men as children. They're being forced to have their daughters being sold. They're forced to be confined at the home. I mean, it's so rampant within Islamic countries where we have these Islamic theocracies, and of course, like, people's religion you should always respect. I think there's two parts to it. It's like respecting someone's religion and choice to be religious, and of course you can. However, we have to ensure people's God-given rights in the United States. I mean, people act like, oh, the government should never tell anyone what to do, even if it's harming someone. Like, just let them do what they're doing. But I would always bring up, what about CPS? I mean, we should never tell a family how to raise their kids, yet it's justified when they're abusing them. Other people step in and take that child away. So when we see that a very valuable person, and all human life is very valuable, is being compromised, I think that it's okay to step in and say, hey, this isn't right, and there's options to get out of it, and it needs to be stopped.
I think to summarize, I think what you said, I think that the key point is allowing, first of all, people to believe in whatever religion they want, right? That's versus getting to a point where we see like this being enforced uniformly within a community, as it is within the Taliban, for instance. That's wrong. That's incompatible with Western civic, or it's open to people practicing or expressing themselves how they wish and within reason. And now, I guess, again, where it gets difficult is like, I think another angle we need in this conversation is, legal rights versus natural rights, right? I think, to your point, children have natural rights, and like everyone has natural rights. But to your point, though, like, I think everyone has a right to not have a price tag put upon them, right? And you can, to your point, like having daughters sold, like that's I think anyone would like call that as a violation of human rights. But again, I guess the only part I'm like confused is like, how do you like talk down these communities? Like how do you make them reverse the extremism, like the radical? How do you make them become less radical than they are going in?
Yeah.
Craig, Olivia, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, something we know that didn't work, for instance, was the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, right? Bush wanted these countries to turn into democracies, but their religious ideology is incompatible with natural rights, respect for rights, and human dignity. So you're not going to have that in these societies. So it's not America's job to go in there and say, you must be a democracy. Like that would be better if they were, but it's incompatible with their thought system and beliefs.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think for a lot of peace to happen, and I even think about this between like the Israeli and Palestinian conflict, is that people would have to put their religious beliefs aside. So I think about that with that conflict. And people are just going to really have to put aside their religious prejudices. However, that's close to impossible in the way that you would need a miracle. And for
Yeah.
people who are so generationally involved in this, I mean, it's like where do you even begin? Not to say that it couldn't happen and compromises can't happen, and that
Yeah.
like a revolution for women, all of a sudden just stand up and just go over and maybe like beat their husbands instead. You know what I mean? Not to say like that couldn't happen. That definitely could, but it's going to take a lot of internal strength for people to realize that. And sometimes I feel like with the social pressure with these women in the Middle East and in general, it's going to have to get so bad until they just can't deal with it anymore. And, obviously it's bad right now. I mean, I would never want to be a woman in Afghanistan. I'd never want to be a woman in Iran.
Yeah.
But maybe it's not to the point where they're, the social pressure is enough where they kind of revolt. I think it would need a whole cultural reset, which would be a revolution, and a revolution towards more Western ideas, because let's just be honest, women are the most free in Western societies, and men are the most free in Western societies, and ideas are the most free in Western societies.
Right. I think part of what makes these revolutions happen is just like access to alternative information in the first place. I guess you could even go back to, say, like the Protestant Reformation that happened because of the advent of like the printing press and like the free flow of people being able to read the Bible for themselves for the first time, irrespective of the Catholic mandate. So I think you're gonna have to have some sort of like replication of that formula, where like you need somehow that people in that community need access to alternative information that's convincing enough to pursue a life alternative to the one they are currently living in.
Right.
And that's, but again, to your point, Craig, is that the United States mandate to democratize the world?
No.
But that's the great debate, it's been going on since probably the Korean
I've been
war,
right, but to your point, though, it's like a matter of like, there's the rights, natural rights of people being violated in these communities, right?
Right. I mean, you don't want to see people being harmed in any way in any part of the world. However, I think this goes into another discussion of should America always save everyone, and how can we save everyone, and that's a whole nother discussion. But in terms of the sudden prominence of seeing Sharia law trying to get its way into American civics, I think it's something that definitely needs to be looked into.
Right.
I think people shouldn't be afraid to criticize it objectively if there is things that will compromise people's rights and compromise, the lives of young girls, of children. And I think we need to really critically assess, is this harming Western society or is this building up Western society?
Right. I think another angle that's interesting that hasn't been brought up yet is the amount of influencers that are specifically targeting males that are apologetic to this ideology, like Muslimhood or in Islamic. I mean, even though like they're not apologizing yet for like the Taliban or like terrorist groups, thankfully not, but like they're at least making Western men more open to Islam. And like, who are these people? Like Andrew Tate, like converting to Islam or becoming a Muslim, and then like talking about it openly. Myron Gaines now like talking about it as well. And then you kind of get like a little bit deeper, and then like people who aren't openly advocating for Muslimhood, but are like still treating women like in a dehumanizing way. Like, they're like the dumb ones that they can get owned by the smart men. Like podcasts such as fortunately the Whatever podcast, and then Fresh and Fit too. Like you see like subtly this rhetoric starting to be built up that the women are the ones that need to be put down because they just put the bad apples on the pedestal. Like it's not like full on cover up mode yet, but like the seeds are subtle. is what I'm noticing.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
everything is a snowball effect.
Yes,
yeah, for
exactly.
sure. But we'll definitely have to be tracking how Sharia law. I don't know if it's going to get passed in Minnesota. If it already has, I know it's being voted on.
That'd be crazy.
If it already hasn't been
Yeah.
voted on in some aspect, so we'll definitely see how it's affecting Western civilization and Western Europe as well. So thanks so much for watching. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Youth Bombs. Email us at, what's the email address again, Craig?
youthbombs@alatrorepublicans.com.
Yes, if you want to have us talk about anything or write in your ideas, thoughts, make sure to like and subscribe. And we post every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 1 p.m.
And on YouTube and Rumble.
Yes, on YouTube and Rumble. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.